obedience is not enough. Power is inflicting pain and humiliation, otherwise you cannot be sure. Power is tearing human minds apart and putting them together again in new shapes of your own choosing. Power is not a means, it is an end. In our world, there will only be triumph and self-abasement. Everything else we shall destroy.
Hi, I'm Femi Okay.
And I'm Malika Bilal. That was a clip from the movie version of George Orwell's 1984. After U.S. President Donald Trump's inauguration, the book had a massive resurgence.
In fact, interest in dystopian art is a popular trend worldwide, filling bookshelves, the small and the big screens. But why? Today, we're exploring that. So what is dystopia? It's the antithesis of utopia. Utopia is the name of an ideal country first imagined by social philosopher and author Sir Thomas More, and that was back in 1516.
Dystopia reflects a place where people lead fearful and dehumanized lives. And increased interest in all things dystopian has some wondering if art is just imitating life. Well, here to discuss that in Bethesda, Maryland, Ron Charles. He's the editor of the Washington Post's Book World. In Los Angeles, writer Marie Lu. She's author of the New York Times best-selling Legend trilogy. It's a series of young adult novels set in a dystopian and militarized future.
In Buffalo, New York, Nnedi Okorafor, she is a novelist of African-based fiction for both children and adults, including Who Fears Death, winner of the World Fantasy Award for Best Novel. And in Dakar, Senegal, photographer Fabrice Monteiro. His work intersects photojournalism, fashion, photography, portraiture, which some have labelled dystopian. It's good to have you here, everybody. Marie Lu, if you could take us a little bit into your legend world, what would we see? How would we know that we were somewhere that was dystopian?
Sure. Legend is set in a dark, futuristic Los Angeles, which is where I live. It's half flooded. This is about 100 years in the future, when all of our freshwater ice has melted and the oceans have risen by 100 meters. And it tells a story of a boy who is America's most wanted criminal, and he's being hunted down by a girl who is America's most gifted prodigy, like the darling of the government. And along the way, they have this cat and mouse chase, and ultimately they figure out the truth of their society and what's been really happening behind closed doors.
So is it the flooding that makes it dystopian? What is it that people say, you know, when I read Mary Lou, I'm reading dystopian literature?
It's, to me, dystopia is it's a mirror of society. It's a twisted vision of what's happening and what's going on in our society that's wrong. And putting it into some kind of alternate reality. So that's what I was thinking of when I was writing Legend, and a lot of it was inspired by memories that I've had growing up in China. I left China in 1989. I was living in Beijing at the time. We lived like a few blocks away from Tiananmen Square. I was there in the square watching the students protest, and it was all very strange and surreal to see what we in the West think of as a dystopia, but living it inside of China at the time, you know, it feels like that's just everyday life. So I wanted to kind of take a look at how difficult it is to really understand what elements of your society are dystopian as you're living in the dystopia, and how it's different when you step outside of it and see what the outside world thinks of it.
So I loved your description of LA, which is why I'm going to give us another description of another big city here in the US. This is Brooklyn, who tweets in their version of what dystopia might look like. They write, a future New York City with no natural shade of trees, just fields of concrete and chain link fences, but luxury condos have private courts guarded by the New York Police Department. So that's one version. But another member of our community wants us to clearly define what dystopia means, because it may not be the same person for everyone. So this is a comment we got from Steve out of Boston, Massachusetts. Have a look.
First, I think we have to be careful not to equate dystopian literature with apocalyptic literature. There are plenty of dystopian tales where things look pretty good. The Spaceship and Wall-E, for example, where everybody seems very happy but are living actually pretty horrible, empty lives. At the end of the day, I think dystopian stories attract our attention because they allow us to wipe the slate clean and then try to fix things, try to make the things that aren't working so well better. And we can fix everything then. We can fix romance, we can fix problems, we can fix energy issues, we can solve problems if we start from scratch. And that's why these stories are compelling.
So Nnedi, I'm wondering your thoughts on that, because I know one of your works, this is the Shadow Speaker, it takes place in a post-apocalyptic world. So is that the same thing as this a dystopian world, or is there a difference there?
I think that post-apocalyptic literature can lead to dystopian literature. I think with the Shadow Speaker, I was doing something else. I was actually in conversation with what the idea of post-apocalyptic literature was, and whether the end is a negative for everybody, whether it can be a new beginning for some people. So it really depends. I think that that post-apocalyptic literature and dystopian literature is certainly in conversation with each other. I wouldn't say I wouldn't separate the two. I don't think you can separate the two. But I think that dystopian literature is bigger. And then there's also the question of what is dystopian literature, because you can look at a lot of literature that deals with societal issues, and you can label them as dystopian even though they typically are not categorized as that. And the one example that comes to mind would be The Grapes of Wrath. I mean, is that dystopian literature? We're dealing with the Dust Bowl, and we're dealing with the time where the environment is raising up and trying to destroy humanity. Is that dystopian literature? So I don't know, the question of categories and defining categories, you can always find gray areas.
How much gray is there for you, Ron?
They do overlap a lot. That's an interesting point. I was also curious, your guest from China said that it wasn't dystopian, it's just the way we live now. It just seemed normal. And in so many ways, we're living that now too. Think of George Orwell's 1984, in which everyone is being watched all the time by these screens in the walls. Well, we all got used to that very quickly over the last few years by carrying these cell phones with us that track our every movement. We now know that our government is tracking all the calls we make, possibly reading all the texts and emails that we send. We all got used to it in just a few years. We were upset at first, but then, we all got, it's okay.
I want you to know, if you're watching this, that the pictures and the photography that you see all around the studio, this is all the work of Fabrice. Fabrice, have a look here at my laptop. This comment comes from PJ. We're talking about what is dystopian art. PJ says, I think it reflects what is weighing on an artist's heart or mind. And when we're looking at these striking pictures, what was going through your head as you were creating this art? Because people are saying this is dystopian art, and your response is what?
I had to look for the definition actually when I received your invitation,
Right.
I need to try to define what was dystopian, and it's funny to hear that it's still quite vague. And actually, my first reaction was, no, I'm not going to answer to that interview, because before that, I would have an interview because my work was Afrofuturistic. So I have this idea of putting everything in little cases. I think is dangerous, because if I consider that specific work, the prophecy, I didn't come up with something with that kind of concept. I just wanted to put out the reality that was surrounding me, and this idea of, because the sceneries, they're all real, and if you take the characters out, you find those places in Senegal. You can go take your camera and you will find these places. So it's not like a recreating something. The idea of putting the spirits in the images was more of well, I have to go a little bit back on the origin of the prophecy. Is that when I came back to Africa, I was amazed by the environmental situation, and realized that actually the kids were born and raised into all this mess, and the way for me to get the attention of this public was to connect the issues with the culture and the traditions. And animism is omnipresent in Africa. Even so, people are Muslim or Catholic, they're still animist. So this idea of creating a story where Mother Earth, who is sick, because she took millions of years to create this planet, to create an atmosphere where we can breathe, where we can live, where we can eat. And in 200 years, we literally destroyed it. So she decided to send her spirits down to Earth, because this is like the last option to authorize the spirits to appear to the humans and deliver them a message of caution. So it's really, to me, it's really in touch with my reality, with what is happening right now. And every single image is about one specific issue. And that issue is global. It's not just in Senegal, it's not just in Africa, but it's planetary.
Nnedi, you just made notes. Yeah. What did you make a note of? Share it with the world.
Yeah. I want to add a little to that. I think that the definition of dystopia depends on the group of people, because for some groups of people in some parts of the world, for example, the lights going out is not a cue for let's start rioting. It's not, the end of the world. And I think that
And do you mean literally the lights going out? Because I know you write a lot about Nigeria, and the lights go out pretty much every night.
Yes,
in fact, people are probably watching this or not because the lights may or may not have gone out. All right, so that, maybe not having regular power, could be the end of civilization if you maybe live in Brooklyn, but not if you live in Abuja.
Correct.
Nigeria.
One thing we can all agree on is that dystopian literature is a lot more interesting than utopian literature. I mean, think how many utopian books there are. There are just a few, and they're pretty boring. But there are lots of dystopian books, and they're all really exciting, and they all interest us. They interest us a lot.
So it's that excitement, I think, is the reason that people love these works. But there's another reason here. This is posited by Krista on Twitter. She says, I just read Iraq 100 Plus, the review yet to be published from Comma Press. It's a dystopian story. They can also be brilliant satire. So that's one take. She goes on to say, the flip side of dystopian art are positive, affirmative movements like Afrofuturism that empowers. And Nnedi, she calls you out here as an expert with that. Do you see that as the flip side, or do you see that rising out of your dystopian narrative?
I think I don't really see it so much as, dystopia or Afrofuturism. Afrofuturism isn't always upbeat. A lot of it is in response to the darkness and trying to show the light, but a lot of it goes dark. So I think it's more complicated than that. I think Afrofuturism is very diverse. So like pinning it down to being focused on upliftment and being positive is, I think, a little short-sighted.
I'm looking at a posting here from the Women's March, and there are a lot of literary mentions in some of the signs that were going around. The Women's March was the day after the inauguration. It was an international march and gathering of women and men and kids around the world. This one references The Handmaid's Tale. It's not an instruction manual. Ron, can you unpack that? Because if you haven't read the book, you won't know why it's not satirical and funny, and a little dig there at what's happening in the United States and probably some other places around the world as well. What's that sign getting at? Yeah.
That's Margaret Atwood's classic novel, in which she imagines a country that the environment is so poisoned that most of the women are sterile. The few women who can still have children are highly prized, but they're all essentially enslaved by the government and used as breeders. And some people are very alarmed in America about a new political movement to restrict the right to abortion, particularly as our remaining Supreme Court seat is being decided here, and how that could affect the Roe decision. So that's a dig at the current administration and its efforts to restrict reproductive rights. And it's one of many, many really clever signs we saw that day.
So what I'm thinking, artists, lessons learned. Are you trying to teach lessons through your art, Marie?
I've never consciously written messages into my work. My first goal is to entertain my readers, and I feel like, going back to what was said earlier, dystopian literature is inherently entertaining because it is so full of conflict. It's just naturally a literature that has tension in it. But I don't set out to write messages, even though when I read back over my own work, I see the messages appearing whether or not I realize it. Lots of things about the youth of today and telling them to seek out the truth, because truth is a very, very relevant thing. You know, everyone thinks that they're the hero of their own story, even the people who are villains. And I think it's important for young people to know that and to be aware of that in their own societies, to seek out their own truths and to take in real information that's not fake news, that's not, you know, in this society, there's all kinds of information out there that can be false and misleading. We've seen the issues with social media these days and how one piece of false news can just spread like a virus. And I think it's something that is very troubling for today's youth to tackle. And I want them to see that and to recognize that of their own society. I think that's part of the reason why I really enjoy writing stories for young adults, because they're the next generation. They're going to determine whether or not the elements that make our society dystopian today continue on into the next generation.
So I want to play a comment from a member of that next generation. This is a video comment we got from a concept artist out of Singapore who does work on India. Fabrice, I'm going to direct this to you. This is Kushal. Have a look at his work.
I think Mumbai as a context in this story is pretty apt, because you see a clear difference between the poor and the rich in the city of Mumbai. So I think also in the year 2098, there won't be any rich or any poor. Everyone would be scavengers looking for resources, looking for pots, looking for shelter. So I think that's what I wanted to paint and present as concept art in this story.
So Fabrice, I'm wondering if you can relate to the themes he's talking about there, of going back to his home and picturing this future that's a little bit bleak.
Well, I'm not so much interested into future because I think we have the reality right now is the present is we have enough to deal with. Like when I was reading the definition of dystopian, it made me feel like we already live in a dystopian world. You know, and
Fabrice,
if we take
give us some examples of your dystopian reality right now.
Well, if you take the thing, for example, from a environmental point of view, is that we are in rupture with nature, with what gives us life and makes us breathe, and we keep in the name of progress and wealth, we still fighting for the situation when everybody all over the planet can see that things have been changing lately. And we can feel it every year. The things are changing. The seasons are changing. The temperatures are changing, and we still try to convince ourselves that it's really about time to do something. And to me, that's totally dystopian. And in a situation like that, when we are confronting an issue that is global, such as what we're going through right now with global warming, and you take that on one side, and on the other side, the nations are getting more and more egocentrical and getting on themselves. Is like it's a total dystopian situation. And if you add to that the fact that the totalitarianism is getting global, is ruling the world now, I think you have all the elements of dystopian world in the present.
Fabrice, does that make you a very depressing person to be with? Is your outlook? I say this with humour, but also deep seriousness. Like, do you have friends who do I don't want to hang out with Fabrice? He thinks we're living in a dystopian society right now, or does that just push you to change the world that you're in?
I think it's my motor. It's the thing that is pushing us forward. I think everyone that has a little creativity, who is interested into bringing something to our humanity is concerned by those issues. Right. And I don't think you need to be depressed because it's there and I want to do. So when I do something like The Prophecy, it's not saying like, oh look, it's terrible, we all gonna die and this and that. No, I say, okay, how can I create some awareness with the new generation? And to do that, I create that tale that originally I wanted to be distributed in the schools and with the images that go with it, to really create You know, put that little seed that take that new generation to another level than what we've been yet. So it has nothing to do about being depressed or anything. It's just the opposite. It's just like we don't have to, whatever we can do at our level around us, we have to do something. And I think it's totally positive. I see a lot of positiveness in all the negativity that is happening right now around the planet. There's also a lot of positiveness, because from when you reach a certain point, there's no other way but up.
Fabrice, you convinced me that you're not a manic depressive. I want people to be able to see your photographs. They're at fabricemonteiro.viewbotbook.com, and you just look through these. These are stunning and striking. Pretty amazing pictures. fabricemonteiro.viewbot.com. Malika?
So Fabrice said he sees a lot of positive, and I want to share a perspective here from someone who sees a lot of negative, but then sees a positive come out of that. So this is Sezen on Twitter, who says, relevant to this topic is a recent sociological analysis I did on the erasure of South Asians from dystopian media. Dystopian media in a post-Brexit world has become almost prophetic, a vision of the all-white future that many Brits hoped for. That's what she says. So she says, as a result, the dystopian media I'm drawn to are ones that present a diverse and inclusive future that aren't just white. Marie, can you relate to this at all? Do you read enough dystopian works that you think are representative and inclusive?
Yes, absolutely relate to that. I think it's such an interesting point that this person makes, because a lot of dystopian literature in young adult actually have elements in their dystopian societies that feel strangely utopian, because they are inclusive of people in a way that we currently don't have in our present society. So I'm thinking of a series called Proxy by Alex London. Is one of my favorite young adult books. And it's a world that is absolutely flawed. People are indebted the poor are indebted to the rich, which is, of course, an element of today's society. But the main character is gay, and he has friends that are gay, and it's never an issue in this future society. They have other problems that they're talking about. In the Legend Society, the idea of sexism in the military is gone. You know, everybody is equal in that sense, and they are tackling other issues and pointing out other flaws in the society. But it's odd to play with that kind of dystopian, utopian thing in future societies, you know?
Right. Let me show you something here.
Absolutely.
The Washington Post bestsellers, February 12th, 2017. So about as up to date as I can get it. Let me scroll down here. Number 1, 1984. Run. What's going on with 1984 here? Read us a little bit and then explain why. I did this at school many, many years ago. I had to study it, and now it is like number 1. People are reading this in their thousands.
Yeah, they went back for 95,000 special printing, and then I think they went back for 500,000 special printing.
Yeah.
This is an amazing increase in sales for this book. Of course, a lot of it is people in school, but I think other people, particularly in the D.C. area, are hearing what's coming out of the administration, their talk of alternative facts, for instance, and saying, gosh, that sounds curiously like what George Orwell wrote about in the 40s.
Prove your thesis by reading us a little Orwell.
Okay, here's a great line here. I've put my glasses on. In the end, the party would announce that 2 and 2 made 5, and you would have to believe it. It was inevitable that they should make that claim sooner or later. The logic of their position demanded it, not merely the validity of experience, but the very existence of external reality was tacitly denied by their philosophy. The heresy of heresies was common sense. You think about those claims they're making about the millions of people who came to the inauguration, when we can all look at the pictures of them all and see that, in fact, there were not millions of people there.
I don't know what you're talking about, Ron Charles. Marie-Lou, Nnedi Okorafor, and Fabrice Monteiro, to be continued. We have so much more to talk about. If you're enjoying this conversation, you have to move, all right? If you're watching on TV, you have to go online. If you're watching it online at aljazeera.com/live or watch here now, you have to go to stream.aljazeera.com for more of our dystopian literature and art and talk about that. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you online. Hello everybody, welcome back. It's good to have you. 30 minutes goes really fast. Do feel free to talk to each other. I can't believe I've got Ron and Marie and Nnedi and Fabrice all together. So just for my sake, do talk to each other because I love it when guests talk to each other. Let me show you something here, Ron. A challenge. This is from David McGibbon. He says 1984 is a great book, but it doesn't tell you anything relevant to today's situation. Problem is, nobody else does either. That is a severe critique. He says, he goes on to say, you know, it's a nice piece of art, like it, nicely done. No. Not telling me anything.
That is not true. Now, all the torture stuff and the world they live in, that seems way too dark for the way we live now. But what Orwell says about language, about the way
unless
people
you're maybe in Gitmo,
use
perhaps.
language, yes. But that insight he has into the way language is distorted in order to control people's thought and then their behavior, that's incredibly relevant right now.
Ah, interesting.
Can I jump in on this? Yeah, okay. I wanted to also add that what I'm reading now, after everything that happened, what I'm reading now, I'm not reading 1984, I'm not reading Fahrenheit 451, I'm not reading A Handmaid's Tale. I'm reading Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. And I feel that if we're looking for any answers or where we're going, it's definitely in Octavia's work. And I'd like to, is there a way that I can just read this excerpt really quickly? Because this really sums it up in a lot of ways. So I'm just going to read this really quickly. Jarrett's supporters have been known now and then to form mobs and burn people at the stake for being witches in 2032. A witch in their view tends to be a Muslim, a Jew, a Hindu, a Buddhist, or in some parts of the country, a Mormon, a Jehovah's Witness, or even a Catholic. A witch may also be an atheist, a cultist, or a well-to-do eccentric. Well-to-do eccentrics often have no protectors or much that's worth stealing. And cultists is a great catch-all term for anyone who fits into no other category and yet doesn't quite match Jarrett's version of Christianity. Jarrett's people have been known to beat or drive out Unitarians, for Christ's sake. Jarrett condemns the burnings, but does so in such mild language that his people are free to hear what they want to hear. As for the beatings, the tarrings, and the featherings, and the destruction of heathen houses of devil worship, he has a simple answer. Join us. Our doors are open to every nationality, every race. Leave your sinful past behind and become one of us. Help us to make America great again.
Ooh.
That book was published in 1998.
You took a long time to get to the point, Nnedi. I was like, I know there's something coming here. I know there's a little mic drop there at the end. Let me show you something. This is from the Women's March again, for just after the day after the inauguration of President Trump. Have a look here on my laptop. This is what the sign says. Octavia warned us. In a sentence, Nnedi, Octavia Butler is important because why? In a sentence.
Boy. Wow.
In a sentence. Just then people can go off and do their own research. In a sentence, she was she go on.
God.
All right, moving on. Ron.
Yeah, thank you. Fine. Important.
Ron, you can do it.
I think the issue of race and dystopians is fascinating. I was talking to a professor of African American literature a few days ago, and she said what's interesting to her is that white people always think of the dystopian looking forward into this scary future. But black Americans can look back. They've already come through their dystopian. They had 200 years of horror and slavery. All the kind of things that we imagine the future dystopian being like is what black Americans already went through.
I think that's an interesting point that I think people online would agree with you on, particularly because there's this person, Dr. Jackson Beckham, who references something similar. So she writes, I think the contemporary moment in the U.S. is rather unique. Personally, writing and reading dystopian fiction is liberating. It's a huge relief from the pressure to carry on as if everything is okay. Everything is not okay, and there's power manifesting this truth, particularly for those who experience the world as dystopian day in and day out, whether that's right now or whether that's 200 or 300 years ago, as you were referencing there. But Marie, I want to bring you in here on this. Are you experiencing what she's experiencing? Do you feel the same way?
I do a little bit, and by the way, Nnedi, that quote from Octavia Butler just sent chills down my spine. And Ron, what you said was it's so relevant because I feel like there's never been a time in American history, at least, and certainly not in the world, where we have not been living in a dystopia. And for many, it's been much worse than for others. And in some way, today's society, it's a testament that we can actually have the ability to look at our society and be able to see, oh, there is something really wrong here. Everything is not okay. And we have the ability to go out into the streets and say so, and to tell each other these things. That, I think, is remarkable to me, because after Tiananmen Square happened in China, it was quiet. Like, nobody talks about it. To this day, my parents give me this look when I bring it up, and they're like, don't talk about it, as if, you know, the Chinese government's still listening to us in Los Angeles, California, and they can tell, you know, that we're talking about it. And I think that's the thing about today, is that we've been living in dystopia since the beginning of time, and now is really the one time where we are able to rise up. It's a very recent thing that people can rise up and express their own opinions about things and try to change things from like an individual level.
Fabrice, what are you working on right now?
I'm working on. I'm very interested into the black man condition and black identity. And mostly also from the fact that I'm half European from my mother and African from my father, so I have 100% African culture on one side and 100% European culture on the other side. So it got me interested into the evolution of black identity through history, and that's the kind of work that I'm on right now.
All right, Nnedi, what are you working on right now? Dish. What's the next book in your head?
Well, in my head.
Yeah.
That's because I just finished one book a few weeks ago.
You're such a slacker.
Yes, I am. I'm so lazy. In my head, I'm working on a novel. I'm editing a novel called Remote Control, which is set in the future. It's set in Ghana, and it deals with both technology and mysticism.
Would it be?
I'll say.
Would it be dystopian in nature? Are you just dark? You a dark person?
Actually, no. This one's not so dark. I go dark and I go light.
Yeah.
You know, it depends on my mood. But this one's not so dark. It's the future, but it's not. You know. It's a little happier.
Looking forward to it being a little happier. Marie-Lou, what are you working on right now? What's the next thing for you?
My next book that's coming out in this October actually is a book called Warcross, and like Nnedi's book, it's probably my most lighthearted of all my books. I tend to write dark books as well, but this one is kind of like my fun book. It is set in the very near future.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, I'm just trying to remember what your version of being fun would be.
It's about video games.
Okay. All right.
It's about dystopia, but it's also about video games.
Right.
It's set in the near future, and things are not going great, but people are playing this virtual reality game that in many ways has made their lives better and has changed a lot of things in society. It's about a girl named Amika Chen who is living in New York City as a bounty hunter, and she is kind of down on her luck until one day she gets a call from the young creator of this game called Warcross, and he hires her to catch a hacker who is messing things up in the game for him. And I used to work in video games, which is why I'm excited to write about this story, and it's got a lot of my favorite things in it.
Ron, have you done your homework assignment yet? I knew you had to do homework, so you couldn't come to the studio.
Well, I'm about halfway done, actually.
All right, okay.
Yeah.
How's that going?
Yeah, it's always torture every week.
All right, thank you. Thank you for being part of the show. Malika, where do you want to leave us?
I will end with this tweet from Imad, who we asked what about this genre resonates with you, and this is a little bit dark, but Imad says that it's a warning for the future and almost always a product of a very hard learned lesson, and sometimes our world is worse.
One last thought. Fabrice had to look up dystopian before he decided that he would be on the show. Fabrice, was it worth it?
It was totally worth it. It's always worth it. It helps you define more your work. Actually, the perception of the others is very important. The perception of the public is very, very important in self-progression. Totally.
Fabrice, Nnedi, Marie and Ron, it's been a pleasure spending time with you. Take care.